Hey church, and welcome to this week's small group. Now this week's sermon was how can we stop doing the things that we know that are wrong. We came to the conclusion that we need to allow Jesus to free us from sin and death. You know, one of the most cinematic storytelling in a movie happened in the beginning of the movie Up. Have you seen the movie Up? I was tempted to play that scene as a part of this video, but it ends on such a sad note that I didn't want it to throw half of the people watching it into some kind of depression. But just as that scene told a story within a larger story of the movie, so Romans chapter 8 tells the story of how Jesus conquers sin and death in our own personal lives against the bigger story of what God is doing in all of creation. See, where the scene from Up ends in death, the scene from Romans chapter 8 leads to victory. I read portions of Romans chapter 8 in every funeral that I speak at because it puts the whole thing into perspective and gives us victory even in death. If you haven't seen the scene from Up that we're talking about, just go into YouTube and type in Up sequence, and you can take a few minutes to watch that. And then answer these questions. How does the scene from the movie Up leave us longing for the hope that God will make all things new? And give some examples of how the gospel of Jesus changes us. For example, we were once slaves, now children. I want to remind you of the story of the prodigal son. Remember the son who demanded the inheritance from his father before his father even died? He was essentially saying to his father that you are dead to me. Then he went out and he partied with the money until it all ran out. He found himself eating pig slop, and he realized that his father's servants lived so much better than this. So he went back home with a plan. He was going to tell his father, I don't deserve to be your son, but I'm asking to be your slave or your servant. So when he comes up and he tries to ask the father wasn't going to have any of that. And he threw a party because his son was lost. And now he was found. Keeping that story in mind, read Romans chapter 8, verses 12 through 17. How should Christians think about sin and sinning in light of this passage? And what is the difference between being a slave to God and being an adopted child of God? Why might Christians be tempted to think of living a life for Christ as some sort of payback for what Jesus did on the cross? And how should the assurance of our adoption into Christ's family through faith in Christ impact how we see ourselves and impact how we live? In case you didn't get there in your small group, here's the secret. Once you're a child of God, that can never be taken away. Just as the prodigal son would never be a slave in his father's house, even if you and I mess up, God will not turn his back on us. Why? Because we're family. Now that I've said that, kind of takes the pressure off, right? Now we can be free to live our lives like our family lives life, the family of God. Read Romans chapter 8, verses 18 through 30. How does it encourage you to know that Jesus is making all things new? And how should God's plan for the world impact how we treat it now? What aspects of living in a fallen world make you groan along with creation? And other than death, which consequence of the fall do you most look forward to going away? How does Romans chapter 8, verse 28 give us hope as we deal with the groanings of this life? The next few verses that you're going to read are the verses that I read in every funeral that I speak at, because these are the most encouraging verses we can read when we feel defeated. Read Romans chapter 8, verses 31 through 39. How has the gospel of God's unstoppable love helped you through a time of anxiety and defeat? And how should the Christian's view of death be different from the unbeliever's view of death? God's love is stronger than our flesh, greater than our suffering, more eternal than death, and more powerful than sin. I want you to close your small group in prayer and ask God for the ability to live in the freedom that we have received through Jesus Christ. And remember that we need to allow Jesus to free us from sin and death. God bless you. Have a great rest of your small group. We'll see you on Sunday. And don't forget to invite somebody from Sunday to your next small group.